8 signs you've entered the Sophia stage, Jung insight. There's a particular kind of morning that arrives, usually without warning, when you sit with your coffee or in whatever quiet you've managed to carve out, and you realize that the framework you've been living inside no longer fits. Not that it collapsed, not that something went catastrophically wrong, just that the whole architecture of meaning you'd been operating from, the ambitions, the benchmarks, the need to prove things to specific people and to yourself, has gone quiet in a way that doesn't feel like defeat. It feels like something settling, something reorganizing around a different center of gravity than the one you'd built your life on. And the strange part is that you don't know whether to be frightened or relieved, because the culture you live in has very little language for this particular transition and almost no respect for it. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the movement of the psyche through archetypal stages. He identified 4 stages in the psyche's relationship to wisdom. Eve, representing biological rootedness and the instinctual life. Helen, the romantic idealization that drives us toward relationship and passion. Mary, the spiritual devotion that moves beyond personal desire. And finally, Sophia, wisdom itself, integrated, embodied, no longer performed, but simply inhabited. While Jung explored these stages primarily through the masculine psyche's encounter with the anima, the qualities of Sophia belong to any person who completes the individuation process. They don't announce themselves. They manifest not as achievement, but as fundamental reorganization, as a series of deaths and emergences that leave you genuinely different in ways that are difficult to explain to people still living inside earlier stages. What follows are 8 of those manifestations, not as signs of superiority or spiritual advancement, but as markers of a particular kind of irreversible psychological maturation. Each represents something dying that once felt essential, and something else appearing that was previously incomprehensible. The hero archetype belongs to the first half of life. In youth and early adulthood, we are driven to conquer, to establish ourselves, to prove our value through accomplishment, to become the protagonist of our own narrative in a recognizable, socially legible way. We need external validation to confirm our existence. We need to win something. Jung understood this drive as developmentally necessary. The ego must form and establish itself before it can be genuinely transcended. You cannot individuate from a self that hasn't yet solidified. That would be bypassing, not evolving. But what Jung called life's afternoon brings a different quality. And in that afternoon, something fundamental shifts. The need to be the hero simply dissolves, not through renunciation, not through the kind of spiritual performance where you announce you've given up ambition, but through the quieter recognition that the entire heroic framework was a necessary fiction that has now served its purpose and outlived it. You become the observer rather than the observed, the witness rather than the performer. You watch the dramas of self-importance play out around you and sometimes in you with neither judgment nor compulsive participation. The fire that once drove you hasn't been extinguished. It's been transmuted into a different quality of attention, one that doesn't require external theater to sustain itself. To people still operating from the heroic stance, this is baffling. You appear to have given up, lost your edge, abandoned your potential. They cannot comprehend that you've moved from proving to understanding, from conquest to presence, because in the culture most of us grew up inside, those 2 orientations don't carry equal weight, and the second one is rarely celebrated. Sophia consciousness marks a transition Jung described as moving from logos to gnosis. Logos is the analytical principle, systematic, concerned with facts and their organization, seeking to understand through categorization and master the world through accumulating knowledge. Gnosis is something else. Direct knowing, intuitive, holistic, concerned with meaning and the connections beneath surface appearances. It understands through immersion, through a kind of participatory awareness that precedes and underlies conceptual thought. This has nothing to do with gender. Despite the language, it concerns modes of perception available to any psyche that has genuinely integrated its opposing aspects. At the Sophia level, you stop collecting information and start perceiving pattern. You stop reading primarily to find answers and start listening to what silence reveals. You recognize that all the accumulated knowledge in the world cannot transmit what presence teaches, what genuine stillness reveals. A library can describe love at enormous length. Only the experience itself conveys what love actually is. 1,000 philosophical frameworks can map the territory of transformation. Only your own direct passage through it reveals its texture. This is part of why conversations that used to stimulate you now feel hollow in a way you struggle to explain. Someone describes their latest project, their optimization strategies, their plans for getting to the next level, and you listen without judgment, but you can see something underneath it they haven't noticed yet. The activity is real, the effort is genuine, but it's also the ego confirming its existence through momentum, through the noise of doing. You've moved past the need for that particular confirmation, not because you've transcended the ego in some inflated spiritual sense, but because you've integrated it into a larger awareness that doesn't require constant external verification. The knowing you access now doesn't arrive through the intellect. It surfaces from somewhere quieter, somewhere most people are too distracted or too frightened to sit with long enough to hear. Mystics have called it holy indifference. Eastern traditions describe it as witnessing consciousness. The language varies across traditions, but the reported experience is remarkably consistent. You develop the capacity to care deeply without being destroyed by outcomes. Events that once triggered cascading emotional reactions now move through your awareness like weather across open sky. Someone insults you, you feel it register, but it doesn't hook into anything and drag you downstream. Someone betrays you, you see it clearly, you process it, but it doesn't fracture your foundation. This is not numbness. It's not dissociation. It's something Jung described as psychological immunity. The difference between inhabiting a storm and becoming the storm. Between witnessing suffering and drowning in it. Between feeling an emotion fully and being colonized by it. This stage produces significant misunderstanding. People interpret your equanimity as coldness. They mourn the loss of your old reactivity, which was, from their perspective, evidence that you cared. They accuse you of having grown distant. And they're correct that something has changed, but what they miss is the distinction between not caring and not allowing other people's internal weather systems to override your own. You haven't stopped feeling. You've stopped accepting responsibility for emotional states that don't belong to you. And this makes you genuinely difficult to manipulate through emotional leverage, which creates a specific kind of discomfort in people accustomed to that form of influence. They may not consciously identify what changed, but they feel the loss of traction. Most people spend the majority of their psychological lives projecting their disowned darkness onto external targets. They locate cruelty out there, manipulation out there, selfishness out there, and maintain their self-concept as fundamentally good by externalizing everything they cannot accept about themselves. This mechanism is so automatic, so deeply embedded in how ordinary social life functions, that most people never examine it at all. At the Sophia level, this mechanism collapses. You recognize with a clarity that isn't comfortable but is completely stable that you are capable of everything you've ever condemned in other people. Every dark impulse you've observed in another human being exists somewhere in your own unconscious. The capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for betrayal, for cowardice, it lives in you as it lives in everyone. The difference is that you've looked at it. You've acknowledged it rather than exiling it. You've brought it into conscious awareness rather than maintaining the fiction that you're exempt. Jung considered genuine shadow integration, perhaps the most difficult work a human being can undertake, because it requires sitting with the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime fleeing, not to indulge them, not to perform them, but to know them. To say, yes, under certain conditions, I could harm, I could betray, I could abandon what I claim to love. Because you have done this work, you stop being shocked by human behavior. You cease being outraged by what people do. You simply see clearly. You perceive someone acting from their wounds, their terror, their unintegrated shadow, and instead of judgment, what you experience is closer to recognition. This does not mean accepting abuse. It does not mean tolerating violation or excusing harm. It means seeing without the distortion that projection creates, and that clarity gives you something most people never access. You become nearly impossible to manipulate through guilt or shame, because you've already looked at your worst capacities and made a kind of peace with their existence in your psychology. Jung described the transcendent function as the capacity to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into one side or the other. Most ordinary consciousness operates in binary good or evil, right or wrong, safe or threatening. The psyche naturally seeks resolution through choosing one pole and suppressing the other, because living in the tension between contradictions is genuinely uncomfortable and cognitively demanding. Sophia consciousness moves past this mechanism. You can hold two contradictory truths simultaneously without your awareness fracturing. You understand that someone can be both loving and harmful, both present and absent, both the best thing that ever happened to you and the thing you needed most to leave. That life is simultaneously tragic and beautiful. That you can love someone completely and still need to end the relationship. This is not relativism. It isn't the abandonment of discernment or the collapse of all judgment into its all perspective. It's the mature capacity to synthesize opposites into a more complex and accurate understanding of how things actually are. Your parent was both genuinely nurturing and genuinely damaging. Your former partner was both kind and cruel. You yourself are both light and shadow, evolved and primitive. more conscious than you once were and still profoundly limited. The transcendent function allows you to exist in the space between polarities without needing to resolve it prematurely, and that space, Jung believed, is where all genuine wisdom actually resides. This makes you difficult to categorize. People in your life attempt to place you in a recognizable box, to assign you a simple role or a clear narrative, and you don't fit. You can't be pinned down in the way that would make you legible to those who require simple stories about people. This confuses some, unsettles others, and occasionally makes you lonely in a specific way, the loneliness of someone who can see the complexity in a situation that others are still experiencing as simple. The Sophia stage brings what the Taoists called wu wei, effortless action, action through non-action. You stop forcing outcomes. Stop trying to make life conform to the designs your ego spent years drawing up. This is not passivity. It's not resignation or giving up on engagement with the world. It's alignment with an intelligence that runs deeper than strategic planning, deeper than the ego's project management. You stop asking what you should do and start asking what wants to happen through you. You become more of a channel than a controller. You trust the process of things rather than trying to dominate it. Water doesn't fight the rock. It doesn't strategize its path. It simply flows according to its nature, and over time, it shapes the rock. Something similar begins to happen in how you move through your own life. You've stopped forcing, and paradoxically, you've discovered that what flows carries more actual force than everything you once effortfully pushed. Jung observed this pattern in individuated persons consistently. They stopped manufacturing and started allowing. They learned to wait for the right moment rather than generating the wrong moment out of anxiety or ambition. This contradicts almost everything that the contemporary culture rewards. You're told to hustle, to optimize, to make it happen through relentless effort and strategic positioning. And you've discovered, through experience rather than philosophy, that the most powerful action is a kind of surrender, not giving up, but aligning with something larger than what the ego alone can plan. When you live this way, things that would have required enormous effort under the old approach begin arriving with a synchronicity that you can't fully explain and don't need to. Opportunities appear, the right people show up, doors open that you weren't even aware existed, not because you're manifesting them through intention or attracting them through positive thinking, but because you've stopped blocking the natural intelligence that moves through situations when ego-driven interference subsides. At a certain depth of integration, something shifts in how you perceive the world around you. Jung used the term anima mundi, the world soul, to describe the living intelligence that suffuses reality. At the Sophia level, you begin perceiving this directly rather than understanding it as a philosophical position. Nature stops being background and becomes something you recognize as conscious, not in a sentimental or romanticized way, in a direct, perceptual way that is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. You look at a tree and perceive something that shaped it in a pattern you recognize as the same pattern that shaped you. You watch an animal and feel something of its consciousness as immediately as you feel your own. You hold a stone and sense the slow time moving through it. Everything becomes animate. Everything becomes meaningful without requiring you to assign meaning to it. This is not projection. It's closer to projection's opposite, which is perception without the overlay of the ego's interpretive framework. The sunset is not merely physics. It is something existence is doing, something that contains information the analytical mind can't fully access. The growth of a plant is not merely biology. It is intelligence expressing itself through form, and at this stage, you can feel that, rather than simply thinking it. This perception changes how you inhabit the world in practical ways. You become gentler and more reverent. You cannot carelessly damage something when you perceive its consciousness. You cannot treat any aspect of existence as disposable when you sense the sacred distributed through everything. This is part of why Sophia consciousness often manifests as increased silence. You speak less, not because you have less to say, but because you are listening to something that words cannot adequately capture, and the words that do arrive feel like they should be chosen carefully rather than deployed constantly. After traversing all the complexity, after integrating the shadow and dissolving the mechanisms of projection and surviving the lonely passage of individuation, you return to simplicity. The Zen image is chopping wood and carrying water, the ordinary, unglamorous tasks of daily life met with full presence. But this is emphatically not the simplicity you possessed before the journey. Before, you were simple because you knew nothing else, because complexity hadn't yet appeared on your horizon. Now you are simple because you have been through the full complexity and emerged on the other side. You've traveled through the dark forest and returned to the village, but you are not remotely the same person who left. You've seen things, integrated things, been broken and remade. Now you are genuinely content with essentials. A quiet morning, a conversation with someone who's capable of real depth, work that uses your actual capacities, you require remarkably little. Not because you can't access more, but because you've understood through direct experience that more doesn't add anything. It clutters, it distracts, it pulls you away from the only thing that actually matters, which is complete presence to this specific moment exactly as it is. This is where you become genuinely free from what might be called consumer consciousness. You cannot be sold to anymore, not in the deep sense of being convinced that you need the next acquisition, the next upgrade, the next experience to feel complete. You've found a contentment that doesn't depend on accumulation, and that, as Jung understood, is the kind of freedom that cannot be taken away because it wasn't purchased or earned from anything outside yourself. The loneliness that comes with this territory. Jung warned extensively about a particular consequence that accompanies this level of development, and he was unsparing in his description of it: profound loneliness. Not the loneliness of physical isolation, and not the loneliness of someone who failed to connect, the loneliness of seeing what others cannot yet see, of knowing what others aren't ready to know. Once you reach Sophia consciousness, you cannot return to earlier stages. You cannot unsee what you've seen or unknow what you know. And this creates a gap between you and people who remain identified with earlier stages of development that is real and cannot be bridged through explanation or patience or any amount of goodwill. They are not wrong. You are not right. You are simply operating from different orders of consciousness, and those orders cannot fully communicate with each other. This is part of why societies have always reacted with a specific unease toward individuated people. They cannot be controlled through the usual mechanisms. They don't respond to the conventional manipulation of approval and rejection. They don't chase the rewards that keep most people running on the wheel. This makes them genuinely threatening to systems that depend on unconsciousness for their functioning. If you're experiencing this kind of loneliness, the sense that nobody around you quite understands anymore, that you no longer fit cleanly into the social world you used to inhabit, Jung would tell you that this is not pathology. It's the solitude that accompanies genuine psychological maturity. You have entered rare territory, and the gap between where you are and where most people around you are cannot be bridged by anything you say or do. It can only be bridged through their own transformation, in their own time, through their own passage, which you cannot force and shouldn't try to. Jung also issued a warning about this stage that deserves to be taken seriously, because it describes the trap that catches many people right at the moment they're closest to genuine wisdom, the danger of inflation, of identifying with archetypal energy and beginning to believe you've become more than human, more evolved, more conscious than the people still in earlier stages. The moment you think you've arrived somewhere others haven't, you've fallen. You've missed the point entirely. Sophia consciousness is not about superiority. It's about humility before the mystery of how much you still don't understand. The genuinely individuated person doesn't proclaim their wisdom, they embody it quietly. They know they are a human being who has glimpsed something larger, and that glimpse confers responsibility rather than status. Your task is not to position yourself above others. Your task is to be fully where you are, and to allow that to serve as quiet invitation to those who are ready for it, while knowing that you cannot drag anyone there before they are. The most honest thing to say about the Sophia stage is that it doesn't feel the way most descriptions of wisdom or awakening suggest it will. It isn't luminous. It isn't serene in the way that sounds like floating above everything difficult. It's grounded, and grounding is often heavier than elevation. It includes the specific grief of releasing identities that used to feel like home, the particular loneliness of seeing patterns in situations that others are still experiencing as personal and unique, the quiet disorientation of finding that the things you were told would matter most, recognition, status, the accumulation of proof that you are someone, have lost their grip without being replaced by anything the culture around you would recognize as equivalently valuable. What replaces them is quieter. It's the capacity to be fully present in a conversation rather than managing its outcome. The ability to love without making demands about what the love is supposed to mean. The freedom to act from genuine values rather than from the need to appear a particular way to particular people. The experience of solitude as something spacious rather than something to escape. Jung called this becoming who you truly are, not the person your family projected, not the persona the culture rewarded, but the actual person underneath all the layers of conditioning and fear and performance. This stage is where that becoming is no longer a project, but simply what you are. And what you are, in the end, turns out to be enough, not in the consolation prize sense, but in the precise sense, sufficient, complete, requiring no addition. Now, I'd like to share a meaningful story with everyone. Randomization. Patient A has a history of heart disease. He takes a red pill that has the sign of infinity pressed into its top. Patient B has begun to eat gravel. She watches the men in the road, their shovels full of dust, and the hunger starts in her throat. Her obstetrician is kind and gives her a blue pill shaped like a bird. Patient A and patient B sit on opposite benches in the park. Patient A contemplates his palm, the swoop of his lifeline, and his fingers don't stop beating. His jaw won't unclench. Patient B spreads her knees around her drum-tight belly, and she listens. Her ear has become sharp to the sound of little things: the ants building their hill in the sand, the tumble of pebbles in the stream. Patient A has begun to moan, a cry beginning in his throat and working its way through the bones of his skull. The sound is low and filled with deep vibrato, the reverberation of caves and cathedrals, the creak of deserts. The moan interrupts the smile on the lips of patient B. Her eyes climb the stairs of her reverie until she finds his face, the hollow of his mouth. "What?" she says, her palm to her cheek. "What is it?" She is looking at his teeth, the silvered pits of his molars. She smells the dark in his throat. Patient A returns her gaze, but it's through the warp of a dream. And it isn't for a long moment that he can close his mouth and stop his noise. The woman and her belly, the bird's light of her nose, seem a signal, a yellow light at sea or at the center of a blind storm. He reaches for a cap to his fear, presses down, feels the wool of terror in his heart compress. He says, "Oh God, my dear, my lovely." She smiles at him, afraid for everything: the love of her stomach, the shining breeze, her pocket full of soil. Dear viewers, that was our channel's discussion on the topic: 8 signs you've entered the Sophia stage. Jung Insight. If you found this video helpful or meaningful, please consider subscribing to support the channel. If you'd like me to create more content about emotions, relationships, or other psychological topics, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. I'll do my best to help you understand why you're feeling the way you do and what's really happening beneath the surface. For now, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.